Succession. What is primary succession and what is secondary succession? So first of all, looking at the definition of succession, it is the change in structure and species composition of a community over time. And remember, an ecosystem is all the interactions of biotic, living, and abiotic, non-living factors. And it's made up of a number of communities. And ecosystems are constantly changing, and this change might be slow or rapid. So a community in an ecosystem changes. It passes a number of stages from the origin to the climax community. And the organisms modify their own environment. Particular communities dominate in different stages of succession, and the stages are called several stages. At each stage, the environment, especially the soil, changes, and it becomes more suitable for other species, which then outcompete the existing community, and eventually a new one will form. When there's no further changing community, first of all, looking at primary succession. On newly formed habitats that have not previously supported a community, like landslide rocks, sand dunes, lava flow, mud deposited in an estuary, etc., that is where primary succession would occur. So the first organisms to colonise in primary succession are known as pioneer species. And the type of pioneer species is determined by the abiotic factors of that environment. And pioneers colonise inhospitable environments. They interact with the abiotic environment, causing features of pioneers. Not all these features are necessarily present in all pioneers, but they may produce large amounts of wind-blown seeds or spores. The seeds don't need dormancy period and germinate rapidly. They are autotrophic, so they make their own food. They might have the ability to fix nitrogen from the air because there's few or no nutrients available. And they might have tolerance to extreme conditions. So now looking at an example of primary succession on bare rocks. So lichens and algae are usually the first to colonise. Lichens survive considerable drying out, and they have a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between algae and fungi. And what happens is the rock slowly is eroded by the hyphae of the fungi, which penetrate the cracks and absorb minerals. And then debris and organic matter collects in the cracks and forms bases of soil with eroded sand or rock particles. And some of the animals you might have present at this stage might be detritus feeding mites. So here are your lichens. Different species there. Next thing is wind-blown moss spores germinate, which will then outcompete the lichens. And the moss will trap water and dead remains, which build up organic matter of soil. And the height and the biomass of vegetation will also increase, so more nutrients get locked up. Some animals you might find at this stage could be insects, millipedes and worms. So you can see that your height of your vegetation is increasing. You've got some mosses here. Okay, next bit. The shallow-rooted grasses and herbs start to establish, and these will outcompete the mosses. At this stage, the primary production will increase, the soil will continue to build and improve, and you might find some secondary consumers and centipedes at this stage. So you're getting your small shrubs, your grasses, the height of the vegetation is increasing, the soil quality is increasing. Then you start to get deep-rooted shrubs, and at this stage you get a lot more micro-habitats. Simple communities become richer and the species diversity increases, and you might find butterflies, moths, small mammals like mice, You might find some reptiles and some birds at this stage. So you can see here, you've got your ferns, you've got your higher bushes, and you've got a lot more microhabitats for things to be protected from prey. Sorry, for the prey to be protected from predators. And then the last stage is trees. So beech and oak are usually the climax community in deciduous woodland. They are a stable community with long-lived plants, and there's usually one dominant or several co-dominant species. The number of food chains increases. There is a balanced equilibrium of species with few, if any, new species replacing existing ones. This stage has the greatest productivity and biomass. So abiotic factors like climate determine what the climax community will be. So it could be a rainforest if it's quite a humid place. It could be the tundra. Obviously in the UK it would be deciduous woodland. So it determines what the climate's like and what the abiotic factors are like, which ones will be the dominant species. So here is the climax community in England. Okay, so common features during succession. So non-living components become less hostile. The plants provide shelter, soil forms, and there's more habitats. There becomes a decrease in nutrients in the abiotic component and then an increase in nutrients locked up in the biotic component. There is increased biodiversity. However, this reaches a peak mid-succession but decreases as the climax community is reached due to the dominant species outcompeting other species. And then eventually you get more complex food webs, and so the biomass increases. So a summary of primary succession on bare rock going into woodland. So the pioneer species colonise the rocks, so it could be things like lichens. The lichens die and are decomposed, helping form a thin soil which thickens as more organic material is formed. This means other species such as mosses will grow. Larger plants that need more water can move in as the soil deepens, like grasses and small flowering plants. The soil continues to deepen as larger plants die and are decomposed. Then you get shrubs, ferns and small trees which begin to grow, outcompeting the grasses and smaller plants to become the dominant species, and the diversity increases. The soil is deep and rich enough in nutrients to support large trees, and these become the dominant species and the climax community. So now looking at another example of primary succession on sand dunes. So this is quite good because you can see all the stages at once. So next to the sea, the sand is an inhospitable place for plants to live. The sharp draining which doesn't hold water, constantly shifting so plants can't establish roots. They hold few nutrients and there's few nitrates. Few nutrients, few nitrates for plant growth. So you can actually set out a transect from the sea all the way into the woodland to see succession. So the pioneer plant on developing sand dunes is marram grass, and they are adapted for life on shifting sands. The marram grass has a dense network of branching underground stems which hang on tightly to the sand, and it's quite tough, so it leaves the leaves are quite able to withstand high winds. The leaves can roll up, sheltering stomata and reducing water loss by transpiration. And once marram grass has taken roots, the windblown sand collects around it within 10 years. The dunes may be covered in marram grass. And now other species can set up in the shelter that the marram grass provides. And humus, builds up as it begins to look like soil. And water retention is improved, mineral nutrients build, other grasses and plants are adapted to living on grassland, which colonise. Eventually, the marram is outcompeted and dies. If left undisturbed for long enough, the old dunes eventually become woodland. And if very wet, the abiotic conditions, the climax community, will be willow carr. In drier places, it might be things like oak and beech. So again, it's determined, the climax community is determined by the abiotic factors around that particular environment. So you can hear these marram grass, the features that they have for being pioneer species. They can roll their leaves so that all the stomata are sunken in pits, so that the hairs, they have hairs which trap the humidity, so it reduces water loss. So secondary succession now occurs at sites that have previously supported a community, like after a forest fire, road building, ploughing of grassland, sudden clearing of land like deforestation, and it's much faster than primary succession. The environment is hospitable. So after a fire, many species disappear, but some of the spores or seeds survive. And pioneer species from neighbouring communities will quickly colonise because the seeds may be dispersed in the wind or by animals, by migration. Without fires, the African grassland would be woodland and the North American prairies would be woodland. Because the land has been altered in some way, the climax community will be different.